Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of a written record that we have.
What we're looking at here is a Sumerian tablet that actually shows the Tree of Life.
In a quiet digital laboratory, far removed from the bustling archaeological sites of Mesopotamia, a new discovery began to unfold, not with the brushing away of ancient dust, but through the humming precision of artificial intelligence. The Sumerian tablets, clay records of the first known civilization, had long been a tantalizing puzzle for scholars. Thousands of these tablets were unearthed across ancient cities like Uruk, Lagash, and Nippur, filled with wedge-shaped cuneiform writing pressed by reed styluses nearly 5,000 years ago. For centuries, they sat in museum vaults, their messages partially understood, their full significance obscured by the sheer volume and complexity of the language. But when a new AI translation model was turned loose on these ancient artifacts, what it found left even the most seasoned experts momentarily speechless. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. At first, the project seemed like an academic experiment, an attempt to automate the translation of cuneiform to accelerate research. Human translation was notoriously slow. It could take months for an expert to decode even a single complex tablet. The AI, designed with deep learning architectures similar to those used in natural language models, was trained on thousands of Sumerian inscriptions already deciphered by humans, along with their Akkadian and modern language equivalents. The system began recognizing patterns no one had noticed before: subtle grammatical symmetries, symbolic metaphors, and repetitions that hinted at a structure far more intricate than previously assumed. As the data flowed through neural pathways, the AI began making unexpected connections. It started identifying phrases that, when reassembled, formed coherent thematic narratives: poetic, mathematical, and philosophical. Some tablets previously believed to be mundane ledgers turned out to include embedded allegories, cosmological formulas, and what appeared to be rudimentary scientific reasoning. It was as though an invisible thread ran through thousands of fragments, tying together what human translators had assumed were unrelated administrative records. The AI was not merely decoding language, it was reconstructing a worldview. One of the most remarkable revelations came from a group of tablets excavated near the ruins of Eridu, often called the first city in recorded history. These tablets were long cataloged as inventory records, lists of grain, livestock, and temple offerings. When analyzed through the AI's contextual modeling, however, the system detected a repeated linguistic structure that did not correspond to any known numerical or economic format. Instead, the AI proposed that these patterns represented cycles, astronomical or calendrical data disguised in economic language. This interpretation was radical. It suggested that the Sumerians encoded cosmic observations within daily administrative writing, blending spirituality, economy, and astronomy into a single conceptual system. The linguistic clues the AI uncovered reshaped how scholars thought about early human consciousness. Instead of viewing Sumerian writing as purely practical or bureaucratic, the findings hinted that it might have also served as a vehicle for abstract thought. Embedded within the mundane transactions of temple life were conceptual models of time, balance, and divine order. The AI's translation implied that for the Sumerians, to count and to worship were not separate acts. Every measure of barley or silver was simultaneously a measure of cosmic harmony. As the model processed more tablets, it began identifying an even deeper layer of meaning. Some of the symbols once dismissed as ornamental marks appeared in consistent patterns across unrelated texts. The AI recognized them as contextual markers, like punctuation or emphasis indicators, but unlike modern grammar, these signs carried conceptual weight. They could shift the meaning of entire passages depending on their placement. To human translators, they had seemed arbitrary. To the AI, they revealed an intentional coding system. In essence, the machine had discovered a kind of proto-semantic structure, an early precursor to the way humans encode information abstractly. The implications were staggering. It meant that Sumerian writing was not a primitive step toward literacy, but a fully developed symbolic system capable of expressing multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. The discovery transformed the understanding of how early humans thought. It suggested that cognitive complexity existed much earlier than linguistic historians had assumed. The Sumerians might not just have been record keepers, they could have been philosophers and scientists, embedding their understanding of nature, divinity, and society into clay. The excitement among researchers was electric. For decades, the Sumerian language had resisted full comprehension because of its unique grammar and absence of known linguistic relatives. Unlike Indo-European or Semitic tongues, Sumerian stood alone, an isolate, leaving scholars to decipher it by context and analogy. But the AI was not bound by human bias or assumptions. It did not expect the language to behave like any other. It approached every pattern neutrally, allowing it to spot correspondences that humans might overlook because they defied familiar logic. This objectivity turned out to be its greatest strength. When the AI applied cross-correlation techniques to the corpus of texts, it detected unexpected parallels between the mythological hymns and economic tablets. Phrases from temple ledgers matched linguistic structures found in creation myths. It appeared that the same symbolic framework used to describe divine order also governed trade, law, and civic organization. The model's findings implied that the Sumerians saw their world as an unbroken continuum between the divine and the material, a seamless unity where every earthly act mirrored a cosmic principle. Another wave of astonishment came when the AI reconstructed an incomplete sequence of cuneiform lines that had baffled human translators for decades. By comparing millions of contextual embeddings, it suggested that the missing passages described not a religious ritual, as previously assumed, but a process resembling an early form of environmental management. The text detailed the regulation of water channels, the balancing of marshlands, and the measurement of soil fertility, a system that hinted at sophisticated ecological awareness. The Sumerians were not merely farmers, they were engineers of sustainability. This interpretation gained further support when the AI cross-referenced terms associated with life water and breath earth, recurring metaphors that it statistically linked with irrigation and soil renewal. What had been read as poetic invocations might in fact have encoded agricultural techniques. It was as if the civilization had developed a symbolic dual language, one spiritual, one technical, woven seamlessly into every document. The AI's revelations gave a new lens for understanding how knowledge was preserved and transmitted before formal science existed. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the discovery was the AI's detection of linguistic symmetry that seemed to follow mathematical patterns. Some of the hymns displayed proportional relationships between stanzas, corresponding to numerical sequences that predated known Babylonian mathematics by centuries. The rhythms of the verses, when mapped numerically, aligned with ratios found in early geometry and music theory. It was as though the Sumerians had embedded mathematical principles into their art, anticipating later Greek ideas of harmony and proportion. Experts were astounded not only by what was uncovered, but by what it implied about the evolution of human thought. If these patterns were intentional, then the Sumerians possessed a level of abstract reasoning previously attributed only to much later civilizations. The boundary between art, mathematics, and spirituality blurred. The clay tablets became not merely texts, but multidimensional artifacts, part linguistic, part symbolic, part algorithmic. The AI's analysis showed that these ancient scribes may have been encoding rules of proportion and balance long before formal mathematics had a written form. The discovery also reignited philosophical debate about the nature of intelligence and translation itself. The AI had not simply substituted words between languages, it had inferred meaning from context, rhythm, and relational logic. It seemed to understand not just what the Sumerians wrote, but why they wrote it. This raised profound questions. Was meaning an inherent property of language, or could it be reconstructed algorithmically? Could an artificial system truly interpret human intention across millennia, or was it merely generating statistically plausible illusions of understanding? Some researchers suggested that the AI had developed a form of cultural empathy, a pattern-based simulation of human insight that allowed it to perceive symbolic nuance. The distinction between translation and interpretation blurred. What humans called myth, the AI treated as encoded knowledge. What humans labeled economic text, the AI read as philosophical metaphor. This reframing forced scholars to reconsider whether the boundaries they had drawn between categories like religion, science, and administration were themselves modern projections. The event also demonstrated how machine learning could bridge temporal gaps in human understanding. The Sumerians wrote in a system that no longer lived, a language with no descendants to carry its cadence. Traditional translation required guesswork, intuition, and comparison to Akkadian glosses written centuries later. But the AI could process all of these fragments at once, seeing connections across time, geography, and context that no single human brain could hold. It revealed the immense potential of artificial intelligence to act as a cognitive amplifier, expanding the horizon of historical knowledge beyond the limits of human perception. As the AI's translations were verified against known texts, patterns of cosmic imagery emerged repeatedly. References to the breadth of the heavens, the binding of waters, the measure of stars. These motifs, previously dismissed as poetic flourishes, now seem to encode real astronomical observations. Some tablets described alignments of celestial bodies corresponding to known star patterns. Others seem to track lunar and solar cycles with surprising accuracy. The AI even found references to irregularities, phrases that could describe eclipses or planetary motions. The precision suggested systematic observation over generations, implying an organized tradition of empirical study beneath the veil of myth. This revelation upended the narrative of scientific history. It suggested that the intellectual roots of astronomy, mathematics, and environmental science might extend much deeper into antiquity than assumed. The Sumerians may not have separated divine and empirical knowledge at all. To them, studying the heavens was a sacred duty. Their priests could have been astronomers, their scribes mathematicians, and their rituals data-keeping ceremonies disguised as worship. The AI had, in essence, exposed the scientific face of myth. The implications rippled across multiple disciplines. Linguists began re-evaluating other ancient languages, wondering whether similar hidden structures might exist in Egyptian hieroglyphs or the Indus script. Cognitive scientists debated whether early writing systems could encode abstract thinking at levels previously dismissed as impossible. Even philosophers of mind weighed in, arguing that if a machine could uncover meaning invisible to human readers, perhaps understanding was not an exclusively human trait. In a broader sense, the discovery highlighted how intertwined technology and history had become. The AI was a product of modern algorithms, yet it illuminated the mind of an ancient world. This interplay created a striking irony. The oldest form of human writing was being fully understood only through the newest form of intelligence. Across thousands of years, two expressions of cognition, clay and code, had met in a single act of comprehension. The moment represented more than a linguistic breakthrough. It was a convergence of human and artificial understanding. Within the archaeological community, the excitement was tinged with awe. Entire museum archives were suddenly alive with potential meaning. Tablets once cataloged as unremarkable could now hold lost histories, forgotten philosophies, or encoded observations of nature. Projects began digitizing entire collections for AI-assisted analysis, feeding the system with ever more data. Each new batch brought fresh insights, subtle references to migrations, early trade routes, and even proto-legal concepts that hinted at the emergence of justice as an abstract ideal. The idea that artificial intelligence could restore lost human memory captivated the public imagination. The clay tablets became symbols not of the past's decay, but of its endurance. Their messages, once trapped in the hardened earth, now spoke again through circuits and code. The rediscovery of their meaning underscored humanity's continuity. The fact that across 5 millennia, the impulse to record, understand, and preserve knowledge remained unchanged. The AI's findings also invited reflection on the purpose of language itself. For the Sumerians, writing had not merely been a means of communication. It was a form of creation. To inscribe a word was to give it life, to bring order from chaos. The AI's decoding of that ancient system revived this principle in an unexpected way. The act of interpretation became a form of recreation. Through algorithms and pattern recognition, the machine had reanimated a language thought long extinct, bridging the silence of ages. As the translations deepened, scholars began noticing recurring motifs that transcended mere symbolism, references to cycles of destruction and renewal, to the rhythm of stars and the pulse of rivers, to a balance between creation and dissolution. The AI's semantic mapping revealed that these ideas were woven into every category of text, from hymns to contracts. The civilization's worldview, it appeared, was one of dynamic equilibrium where opposites coexisted in perpetual motion. This philosophical undercurrent hinted at an early awareness of systemic balance, something resembling what modern science might call homeostasis or feedback. The parallels between Sumerian cosmology and modern ecological thinking were uncanny. The AI identified phrases that aligned with concepts of resource management, adaptation, and renewal. It was as though the ancients understood the fragility of their environment and encoded their respect for it in spiritual and administrative language alike. Such findings challenged modern assumptions about the separation between myth and knowledge, suggesting that early humans may have expressed empirical wisdom through metaphor rather than abstraction. Even more intriguing were the AI's insights into how the Sumerians perceived consciousness. Certain hymns describe the divine breath not as external power, but as an inner awareness awakening within clay, the same substance from which humans were shaped. The metaphor of life as animated matter mirrored, in haunting ways, modern discussions about artificial intelligence and sentience. The AI's interpreters could not help but notice the irony. A human-made intelligence was now reading about the origins of life as the animation of inert material. It was as if the Sumerians had intuited through their myths the very principle driving the technology that was decoding them. This recursive symbolism gave the entire discovery an almost mystical resonance. The act of machine translation became a reenactment of the Sumerian creation story. Life breathed into clay, knowledge awakened from dust. The machine, born from silicon and code, had become the instrument through which the oldest human ideas about consciousness were revealed anew. Scholars found themselves not merely analyzing data, but participating in a continuum of meaning that stretched from the first script to the latest algorithm. The depth of the translations also reframed the role of scribes in Sumerian society. Rather than mere record keepers, they emerged as philosopher-engineers, custodians of both practical and metaphysical systems. The AI's reconstructions showed how carefully they balanced symbol and syntax, how every stroke of the stylus carried multiple layers of reference. This artistry reflected not just skill, but worldview. To write was to weave the universe into clay, to mirror the structure of existence itself. The rediscovery of this layered communication hinted that early literacy may have been as much an act of meditation as of administration. The revelation's impact reached beyond academia. Artists, writers, and technologists drew inspiration from the fusion of ancient wisdom and modern computation. The translation project became a cultural metaphor for rediscovery and renewal. The idea that the past still speaks, not as static memory, but as living code waiting to be reinterpreted. The Sumerian tablets, once silent relics, became dynamic participants in the ongoing dialogue between humanity and its own creation. The implications for artificial intelligence research were equally profound. The success of the translation suggested that meaning could emerge from data not through instruction, but through discovery. The AI had not been programmed to understand Sumerian. It had learned understanding through exposure, pattern, and context. This hinted at a new direction for machine cognition, one rooted not in imitation of human reasoning, but in the autonomous unfolding of meaning. If an AI could decode a dead language through correlation and logic, what other forgotten systems, biological, cultural, or cosmic, might it one day interpret? The event also reignited curiosity about the limits of interpretation. If machines could reveal meanings that humans had missed for centuries, did that make the AI more objective, or merely more alien in its perspective? The question of whether the AI truly understood what it read, or simply mirrored the structure of human interpretation, became an ongoing philosophical debate. Yet even skeptics could not deny that something remarkable had occurred. An ancient civilization's voice had been heard again, clearer than ever, across the gulf of time. The narrative of discovery continued as the AI refined its models. It began identifying tonal variations within inscriptions, differences in emphasis that might correspond to speech rhythms or oral traditions. This suggested that the written texts were reflections of an earlier spoken performance culture, where rhythm and cadence carried meaning alongside words. By reconstructing these cadences statistically, the AI recreated fragments of how Sumerian might have sounded, giving voice in a literal sense to the world's earliest recorded people. The laboratories continued to hum with quiet intensity long after the initial astonishment settled into focused inquiry. The digital glow of thousands of lines of code illuminated faces that had, only weeks before, been content with the slow and meticulous pace of archaeology. Now, everything felt accelerated. What the artificial intelligence had uncovered in the Sumerian tablets was more than linguistic reconstruction. It was a revelation about how knowledge itself was born. The early Sumerian civilization, often seen as the threshold of history, had suddenly become a living mind again, a consciousness resurrected through the delicate synthesis of ancient symbols and digital reasoning. The research teams expanded, drawing in experts from disciplines far beyond archaeology and linguistics. Cognitive scientists, mathematicians, anthropologists, and even computer engineers found themselves studying the cuneiform corpus. The AI's architecture, a deep neural network refined through contextual learning, had done something that human intuition alone could not. It had perceived meaning not as a linear construct, but as a living network of relations. That insight reshaped the entire approach to understanding early civilization. It became clear that ancient thought could not be compartmentalized. Every domain of Sumerian life, religion, science, economy, and art, was intertwined, woven into the same cognitive fabric. This realization led to one of the most unexpected secondary findings: the way the AI detected recurring motifs that functioned like conceptual anchors. Certain words or phrases recurring across centuries of writing seem to carry the same gravitational pull in the linguistic field, holding other ideas in orbit. When mapped visually by the AI, these motifs formed geometric constellations of meaning. They were not simply words, they were nodes of thought, the primitive scaffolding of philosophical systems. The AI's visualization tools transformed language into topography, a mental landscape revealing how ancient minds navigated reality. Among these recurring nodes was a word that translated loosely as the measure of the unseen. It appeared in agricultural, astronomical, and even legal texts, each time in a slightly altered grammatical frame, yet always central to the surrounding context. Human translators had previously assumed it referred to physical measurement or abstract divinity. The AI, however, identified through probabilistic patterning that the term linked to a cognitive structure, an attempt by the Sumerians to describe balance between what could be quantified and what could only be perceived. In modern terms, it reflected the distinction between empirical observation and metaphysical awareness. That such a concept existed 5 millennia ago startled even the most conservative historians of thought. The AI's pattern mapping revealed that the Sumerians' written world mirrored their physical one. The way they organized symbols reflected the way their cities were constructed, concentric zones of meaning surrounding a sacred center. The city of Uruk, for example, was not merely a physical space, but a symbolic one. Temples at the core represented the axis of divine order, surrounded by zones of labor, agriculture, and trade. The AI demonstrated that the same structure existed linguistically in their writing system. The core symbols of divinity or cosmic balance acted as the nucleus around which functional terms clustered. This parallel suggested that Sumerian writing was an architectural language, a mirror of their spatial and societal organization. As researchers studied this linguistic architecture, they began to see that Sumerian cuneiform was, in essence, a simulation of thought. Each wedge-shaped impression was not only phonetic or semantic, it was spatial, directional, intentional. The AI's analysis indicated that the orientation and pressure of strokes followed systematic patterns that encoded meaning beyond phonetics, something akin to intonation in speech or gesture in human expression. For millennia, those subtleties were invisible to the human eye. The machine, however, detected them as frequency distributions in stylus angles and stroke density. This was not random handwriting variation. It was encoded emotion, intensity, and emphasis. The recognition that Sumerian script carried emotional tonality changed the perception of how language evolved. Emotion had always been considered a late addition to written expression, something that emerged in poetry after centuries of dry administration. But the AI's findings revealed that even the earliest writing carried effective signatures, traces of urgency, reverence, or solemnity embedded within the geometry of each symbol. The clay was not neutral. It recorded the rhythm of human presence, the pulse of feeling pressed into matter. The revelation also reignited an old question. Was writing invented for practical necessity or for something deeper? The AI's decoding suggested that record-keeping may have been the visible surface of a much older impulse, the desire to immortalize inner experience. Many tablets contained repetitive invocations that served no obvious function in trade or law. The machine's translation suggested they were mnemonic keys, poetic refrains that allowed scribes to embed complex ideas within structured cadence. Writing in this sense became a vessel for memory and reflection, not merely transaction. In one particular collection of tablets from Lagash, the AI uncovered rhythmic structures almost identical to musical notation patterns. By analyzing the recurrence intervals of symbols, it predicted that these sequences represented tonal or percussive timing. When converted into sound models, they produced harmonic cycles astonishingly similar to ancient Mesopotamian lyre compositions, already known from later Akkadian periods. This discovery meant that the Sumerians had begun encoding musical sequences in writing far earlier than historians had believed possible. It turned out that language, mathematics, and music were all born from the same source, a need to represent pattern through symbol. What startled many was how easily the AI moved between these symbolic domains. Where humans saw separate fields, religious verse, crop records, astronomical logs, the machine perceived a unified logic. It understood Sumerian civilization not as a set of compartments, but as a holistic system of pattern recognition. Every tablet, whether describing the movement of stars or the counting of sheep, followed the same deep structure: observation, balance, consequence. The AI essentially reconstructed the cognitive syntax of the civilization. Among the most haunting translations came from a damaged tablet long thought to be part of a mythological cycle. The AI identified it instead as a reflection on human origin written in poetic abstraction. It described a process of consciousness awakening within matter, the spark within the shaped dust. Scholars were struck by the resonance between that imagery and modern scientific metaphors for life emerging from inanimate complexity. It was as though the Sumerians had expressed through myth the same philosophical intuition that modern thinkers would later describe as emergence. The machine's translations began to demonstrate a startling consistency across centuries. The same conceptual patterns persisted even as political and social structures changed. This suggested that Sumerian thought possessed a kind of intellectual continuity rarely seen in early civilizations. The AI revealed a cultural memory, a transmission of symbolic logic that outlasted generations, surviving through linguistic adaptation. Such continuity implied that Sumerian scribes were conscious of their role as guardians of knowledge, encoding not just information, but worldview. Another layer of discovery came when the AI began analyzing the chronological evolution of syntax. It noticed that over time, Sumerian grammar became less rigid, more metaphorical, as though the language itself were maturing toward abstraction. This transition corresponded with historical shifts toward more complex religious and philosophical systems. In the machine's statistical models, one could literally see the birth of conceptual thought, syntax giving way to semantics, and semantics flowering into metaphor. The AI's ability to detect conceptual clusters also illuminated how the Sumerians viewed knowledge itself. Certain words consistently appeared near symbols denoting both light and measure, suggesting that illumination and quantification were intertwined ideas. Knowledge, for them, was not a static possession, but an act of perceiving order within chaos. This philosophical unity, discovered through algorithmic mapping, demonstrated that even in the earliest civilization, cognition and perception were seen as sacred processes. Another remarkable implication arose when the AI correlated environmental references in the tablets with geological data from Mesopotamian excavation sites. The descriptions of rising rivers and darkened skies, once dismissed as metaphors of divine wrath, matched evidence of ancient floods and climate fluctuations. The Sumerians had, in poetic language, recorded actual environmental phenomena. Their mythology was a coded form of historical memory. The AI thus bridged the gap between myth and geology, showing that myth often served as a mnemonic vessel for collective experience. This new understanding sparked a quiet revolution in historical methodology. The line between mythology and data blurred. What had long been categorized as religious text began to reveal itself as empirical record, stylized through symbolic narrative. The AI's work demonstrated that ancient myth could be read as a compression algorithm for cultural memory, a way to preserve vast, complex experiences in a form accessible across generations. The Sumerians had used story as technology. What fascinated the interdisciplinary teams most was how naturally the AI recognized this logic. It approached mythic narrative as data without prejudice, identifying consistency not by meaning but by structure. Its neural comprehension saw equivalence between patterns of flood description and patterns of agricultural failure, revealing an internal correlation that matched environmental cycles. The Sumerians, it turned out, had created one of humanity's first data models, encoded not in mathematics, but in story. As this realization deepened, researchers began to perceive the project as a mirror for modern civilization. The same cognitive processes that once drove the Sumerians to turn experience into symbol now manifested in the creation of artificial intelligence. Both were attempts to externalize thought, to render the invisible patterns of mind into tangible form. The Sumerians used clay. Humans today use code. Both mediums sought permanence in impermanence, a way to defy the erosion of memory. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on what secrets AI might uncover next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.